So what is a representation review? So it is an opportunity to take a fresh look at the structure of the membership of council and the way councillors and community board members are elected. Now, we have to do one of these at least every 6 years, and the last review which was done then set out the membership for the council for the 2016 elections and the 2019 elections. When we go through this representation review, the outcome of that will set the membership for council for the 2022 local elections and the 2025 elections. When we go into a representation review, there are a number of questions that we need to start asking the community and asking ourselves as the council and what that membership may look like. The first one of those questions is how many councillors should we have? And should those councillors be elected from across the whole district or split into wards? If wards are introduced, what should the boundaries look like? And if we have a ward system, how many councillors should each ward have? The representation review also goes into having a look at should we have community boards, and in our case, retaining them or even introducing new ones. And finally, what we're looking at in this representation review is the result of the council decision around the introduction of Maori wards. So within that, how many Maori wards could we have, and how many seats might sit within that ward? So why is a representation review important? They ensure our electoral arrangements are fair, and they ensure equality of access. They enable citizens to discuss the nature of effective representation in our district, and it also allows for us as citizens to contribute to our experience of democracy, not just locally, but also what might be going on within the national context. And there are many things to consider when we're looking at putting together an initial proposal. I'm just going to take some time now to go through some of those considerations so that we can all understand the inputs that go into a proposal and the representation review. The first one is looking at determining what the overall framework may look like. And so that's a discussion around a Maori ward system and a general ward, or Maori wards, general and at large. Now, I think it's really important to note at this point that only those that are on the Maori electoral roll will be able to vote for persons running for a seat in the Maori ward or wards if there are more than one. The second consideration that there is having a look at what are the total number of councillors that might be sitting around that council table and making decisions on behalf of all of this. That total number excludes the mayor, as the mayor is voted from everybody across the district. However, the rules state that we can have a minimum of 5 councillors, and you can have anywhere up to 29 councillors. The third consideration that we have is having a look at how many Maori members could we have. And this comes quite down to a bit of a calculation, really. Determining the number of Maori members is based upon, first of all, identifying the total number of councillors that we will have, and then knowing or having made a decision on what type of framework is going to be used, and whether that is a mixed system of general wards and at large, taking those at-large councillors and removing them from a calculation, and then doing a very complicated calculation to work out those numbers. These numbers, in terms of the Maori electoral population of the district and the general electoral population for the district, are provided to us, and they're provided to us from Stats NZ. and they're largely based on that resident population in the 2018 census. So depending on how many councillors the proposal will look at in total, and whether there's an at-large component, that will determine ultimately how many Maori seats there will be. So consideration number 4 is this concept of fair and effective representation. And in a review, we must look at providing for fair and effective representation. And there are generally 3 factors to considering this and having a look at what that means. That's having a look at communities of interest within our district, and whether those communities of interest that have been identified have effective representation, and then whether that representation is fair. So what is a community of interest? Oh, it's gone one too far, sorry. Unfortunately, a community of interest isn't defined, so it is very broad and will mean different things for different people. However, what we're looking at is, are there identifiable communities below our district level? So Rotorua in itself is a community of interest. We are one district. But within that, are there some distinctive interests and needs that need to be considered and should therefore then have a voice and be reflected at the council table? So a way of having a look at or being able to identify what a community of interest may look like is looking at things around, is the district got some physical or geographical barriers for why people may be clustered in certain areas? Are there some economic differences between suburbs or groups that make those particular groups vulnerable or need to ensure that they've got a stronger and clearer voice? Demographics is also a similar piece of information here. And also potentially the local history of the area, local iwi and hapu. Effective representation then starts having a look at, is that voice coming through in a manner that is being represented? And we can have a look at that by how that mix of where people are ultimately going to be voted from. And that's having a look at the splitting potentially of numbers around the council table when all of this is decided upon. And when you're starting to look at that total number of councillors and your framework, you may need to reconsider and ensure whether effective representation is actually being achieved. So if you've got effective representation, have you actually got fair representation? And this needs to be applied when you're starting to have a look at a ward system. And what this means is, for every ward or for every split within the district, you need to ensure that we've got approximately the same number of population to an elected member. And it's based on workload and it's based on population, and it ensures that the voices in that are coming forward are, again, it's that effectiveness, but is the voices in that, is that fair? And there's a bit of a rule of thumb to test whether the system is fair, and that's having a look at a population and how we divide that up against the number of electors is around this plus or minus 10%. So say we had 10 councillors at the table and we were wanting to ensure that we have got fair representation. With our current population of, say, approximately 70,000, 7 members would potentially be a good number, because you could be saying that you've got 10,000 population to 1 councillor, and that's an element of seeing whether the system is fair or not. Consideration number 5 and this is the last consideration that we look at when we're going into the framework of looking at a representation model, is having that question amongst the district around community boards. In the community, within the review, we can look at establishing new community boards, or we can alter or we can disestablish an existing community board. Currently, Rotorua District has 2 community boards. We have a Lakes Community Board and we have a Rural Community Board. Both have been set up quite differently in the past, and our Rural Community Board was introduced as part of the representation review 6 years ago. So they've been in operation for nearing 6 years now. And the way that particular community board was set up was driven from feedback at the time and a number of decisions that were also being made at the time, where the rural community were very strong in coming forward and saying there was not a rural voice around the community table, and hence why after the consultation and the review process the Rural Community Board came to be. So looking at the structure of a community board, there has to be a minimum of 4 people elected to that community board. However, you can have up to a maximum of 12. Within that 4 to 12, at least 4 of those members must be elected community board members, but you can appoint other members to your community board, and they ultimately have to be councillors, and only councillors on the community board. They can only be less than half the total number of elected members. Also, if the district does decide to go with a much wider look in terms of splitting the district into multiple wards, if the ward system is being used, then the community board must come from the ward within which that community is in. Now, there has been quite a lot of information, I know, just given there, and it is very broad brushed at this stage. It's just to share with you some awareness around what are the elements that need to go into the thinking for a proposal around representation review. And there's a bit of a timeline around all of this. The whole representation review is split up into a number of phases. And we're currently in phase 1, which is this looking at sharing and making people aware of a representation review and all of the elements that need to be thought of and considered when going into one. Feedback that we will get from the community by doing talks like this and by running surveys and asking questions and testing proposals with various groups will go into forming an initial proposal, which the council will have to adopt, and they have to adopt that by the 31st of August this year. Following which, then the council will take that initial proposal out to the wider community in a consultation phase that must open on the 8th of September and must close on the 8th of October. And at that point, any time within that month, the community can provide written submissions or provide feedback in any way about the elements that are within that proposal. Upon receiving all of that feedback, there is also an opportunity for the community to come in and talk to the council if they strongly oppose or agree with parts of those proposals and put forward those ideas in that, at which time the council will make a final decision on what that membership and framework looks like. Once they've done that, that proposal has to be sent off to the local government commission, and they'll have a look at our proposal. And if in the meantime anybody appeals the process, then the local government commission will run a bit of their own process where they come in and they will talk to people who have appealed the proposal, and they'll also hear from council as to all of the information and inputs that have gone into a proposal, and then they'll make a final decision. Notification of the final membership is made around April so that the community is well aware of what the membership looks like in terms of leading into who might you vote for in the next elections. In terms of an overall framework for the representation review, at the crux of things, that is what it is, and that's what all the elements and various bits feed into that. I'm happy to take any questions or elaborate further on any parts, the elements of that. What we would really encourage you to do is we've got a lot of information on Council's Let's Talk platform. There's a lot more information in that, and we also have a bit of a survey. The survey form is in hard copy form for you to take away with you today. Or I think you've got a little direction to our Let's Talk platform. So we would really love to hear from you around what you think are the elements that need to be considered going into coming up with that initial proposal. So happy to take any questions or go back to any of the elements that you would like me to go over in any more detail.